the idea that, yeah, as you said, what Halak calls the doctrine of progress. Okay, it takes a certain assumption of what time is and how it can move to say that something like progress is even possible in the first place. We have an imagination that time is sort of linear, right, and fairly homogeneous. So there were eras before, and we have these kind of things we call years that mark the calendar, and we are slowly marching forward, and we assume that we are marching forward indeed and not marching backwards, such that we can say, well, we don't want to go back. And how many academic articles or books have you read where the author in the end, he has to, his publisher is forcing him to give some sort of way out or some sort of conclusion. He says, well, we can't go back. Well, that's a whole idea of what time is, that you could go back to it or not go back to it in the first place. Is the past really back? Is it something that we aren't contemporaneously living at the same time? Okay, so there's a certain definition of time here, and it should be defined and have our attention drawn to it so that we can maybe push back and see, well, is this really the most accurate descriptive way to describe time? Is this some concealing other sorts of things? To define time as something that is linear and something that is moving forward is indeed concealing other things. It's, as Halak says, more of an ideological position, okay? And it has a moral dimension to it. It creates certain moral imperatives, right? It has baked within it the assumption that whatever is coming down the block as new or coming through the pipeline is better, right? And it has an assumption that whatever we have left behind and moved on from is somehow worse. Halak describes this as ephemeral truth, okay? The modern era is defined by ephemeral truth, meaning that there's an assumption that everything that we currently believe is the most true possible thing that we could believe in or be doing. Now, it might be replaced in the near future, but it's certainly better than what came before it. And we can only look at sort of, I guess, the woke culture and sort of woke values and the sorts of things that have been changing quite rapidly to kind of see how these sort of what our society holds as sacred can change so quickly. And how the values that we had even just 5 years ago are no longer sufficient.
Or even 5 minutes ago, I would say.
Or even 5 minutes ago, of course.
The rate of change, or progress, as it's called, seems to accelerate and knows no natural terminus. It seems to just be open-ended. So who knows what the next obligation, next letter to be added to the alphabet, LGBTQ, whatever, will be. Incest, pedophilia, bestiality. Sorry to mention these things, but these are all possible in this world of progression and progress.
Yes, exactly. And so we create a situation here by defining time in such a way, and by assuming that that progress is being made, and which is something that people take on faith as a doctrine, right, a dogma even. We create this situation where we are always assuming that we are arriving at the most true conclusions or most true way of living right now. Now, this is very, very slippery, okay? Because we're also admitting, and people have pointed this out when it comes to, again, like sort of wokeness and so on and so forth, that we're admitting that 5 years or 10 years from now, or yes, 5 minutes from now, our way of thinking is going to be outdated, right? And yet, that doesn't give us pause when it comes to the violence that we're willing to perform, right? We see all these sorts of things, rainbow flags being painted on bombs that are being dropped in the Middle East and things like this, right? Nobody gives pause by saying, well, maybe 5 years from now we'll think differently about this. No, this is the most currently true thing, and it's much more true than anything that came in the past. And it sort of is a self-referential schema of truth. And that's another thing that Halak points out, is that there's no foundation or reference except for itself. Okay, why is it true? It's because it's the latest thing. And anybody who studies logic will know that this is a fallacy. And yet this undergirds so much of how we automatically feel about things in the modern era and our sensibilities. It's the latest. You have the latest phone, the latest medicine, cutting edge, right? All these sorts of things. We assume that is good. We assume that it's better, even if we're admitting that it will be replaced one day, and one day will not any longer be the best. There's an assumption that in the point in time that we inhabit right now, that it is the absolute best.
And just to, he mentions in passing in the bit I read, the attempt to dominate and control nature and the environment and the catastrophic consequences of this scientific progressive attitude of exploiting natural resources. And we know where we're going with this. So this attempt to be progressive and ever more cutting edge can lead to absolutely world threatening consequences. It's not just neutral. It can really impact our lives in quite terrible way. We're seeing it now with the consequences of climate change.
Yes, and I think the most dangerous thing, and Halak is getting at this when he's talking about how self-referential modern history is, or the doctrine of progress is that you can't critique it, you can't challenge it, because by very definition, of time, or the assumption of time that's within this sort of doctrine, is that it's already the best, and if we have any critique of it, it's simply going to be fixed in the next update or the next iteration or the next whatever, right? So we might see cracks. You might point out cracks like, oh, we're polluting the oceans, and we're killing some sort of species and making them extinct, and so on and so forth. But the assumption is always what? The assumption is always that the issue is, or the resolution to that issue is just around the corner. We have simply not yet found the cure. We have simply not yet found the technology or invented the thing that is going to be able to save us from the problem that the march of progress has put us in the first place.
And this march of progress is very, as Alex says, is very particular to a specific part of the globe. It's local, it's geographically located in Europe and the United States, and it has particular historical roots. We can trace back to the Enlightenment, and he mentions Hegel as well. This is not a universal, neutral, value-free system. It's highly specific, culturally, philosophically contingent upon a unique set of circumstances in Europe's history, that with pretenses to be global and universal. And this is a highly questionable assumption in Wallach's view.
Yes, definitely. And that's one of his first sort of defining features of the state, which we'll get to in a second. But just so just to finish sort of the conception of time. So, okay, how else could we imagine time? I guess that's something that if people are stuck in the doctrine of progress, the march of progress, well, we're doing the best that we can. It's better than what was before. Before we had poverty and disease and famine, and now we have, health and modern medicine. Before we had, traditional oppression and sort of things like that, and now we have freedom and individuality. Okay, what's another way of relating to time? Even though Halak challenges all those sorts of supposed fruits of modernity and progress in and of themselves, an alternative way to relating about time can be revealed by looking at how the field of history has changed over time. We mentioned this when we talked about Talal Asad, about the histories of the Greeks, right? Were not modern histories in the sense that we use the term. Okay, we weren't obsessed with accounting for every single factual, detail of what actually happened in human experience. Nor did we consider all human experience to be homogeneous, universal, able to be recorded. The pre-modern history, or the pre-modern idea of history, or pre-Enlightenment idea of history, was something that was moral. Okay, it was intended to instruct. You have the fables, and you have the different sort of stories, and you've got Herodotus going here and there. It's all intended to instruct. The question isn't, did this really happen? That's the modern question. Okay, the question is, how should this be informing what I'm doing right now? We could call this, instead of modern time, we could call this moral time, right? And this is very, very Islamic, this idea, because if you read the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala critiques some of the Quraysh for saying what? Asatirul awwaleen. These are just stories from the past. That's one of the critiques of the Quraysh, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenges them on that and says that you can't say that. That's the wrong way to look at time. You are living the past again right now. Okay, everything that you have within the Quran, these are typologies. Yes, they're also historically, in the modern sense, true. Fir'aun and Qarun and all these sorts of characters, they're literally true, but there's a transhistorical element to them, and there's a moral dimension to them. How are you going to act right now? What are you supposed to do if you're in this situation? All right, and so it collapses that line of linear history, and it actually makes it into maybe something of a point or a loop or a spiral or something like this. Is that we benefit from the past within moral history. In fact, we are living the past again right now. And we're going to constantly continue to relive the past. and this is kind of the moral dimension of, you know, being tested and accountability and then judgment in the afterlife and things like this. That's not modern time. Modern time, you can't learn from the past. We can't go back, right? We're not going to go back to the Stone Age. We're not going to go back to doing those things.
It's not just you but you're actually not allowed to. For example, if some Christian was to, you mentioned certain recent fashions, was to talk about Sodom and Gomorrah in the Bible,
right,
as a moral lesson for us today. We know what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. That would be immediately ruled out as completely unacceptable and illicit. But that's the application of timeless truth, biblical truth, this is the Quranic truth as well, to our contemporary. But that's somehow invalid to do that. But for a Christian, a Jew, and a Muslim, traditionally understood, these are valid comparisons. They're moral evaluations of our era in the light of previous generations who underwent God's judgment in the past. So just to illustrate your point, perhaps.
Yes, exactly. And the modern frame will say, well, you need to update your interpretation of those stories in order to adhere to modern values, right? Because now we've got the best possible values. Whereas the moral time would say, no, we are living the exact same thing again, even if the minor details are changing. And the point is to, what's the right response? That's what we're being asked. So they're entirely different ways of conceiving of the world and of time.